Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us for today's BU Professional Development webinar, Planning Ahead, Creating a Successful Retirement. My name is Jeff Murphy, and I'm an Associate Director in the BU Alumni Relations Office, as well as a proud alumnus of the BU Questrom School of Business. Today's webinar is sponsored by Boston University Alumni Relations and is offered as part of our BU Alumni Career Weeks 2017 series. BU has dedicated the entire month of March to alumni careers with 31 days of networking events, professional development webinars, and panels, both online and in 14 cities around the world. Whether you are a seasoned professional looking for a change, new to the job market, or just need some advice to apply to your career, there's likely an event happening for you. See the full schedule of events on our website now at bu.edu/alumni/careerweeks. It's important that we get your opinion on how we're doing, so we very much look forward to receiving your feedback via a survey that will be emailed to you later this week. Today we have alumni joining us from places like Bulgaria, Hong Kong, Dublin, Ireland, Peru, San Diego, Denver, Orlando, Florida, Chicago, St. Louis, and as always, dozens of Massachusetts alumni from towns like Springfield, Hudson, Westford, Lincoln, Danvers, Franklin, and more. For each and every one of you out there, please know that we really do value your opinion on every program that we offer. Before I introduce today's speaker, some brief housekeeping notes. As you know by now, this webinar is being hosted on the Adobe Connect online meeting platform. If you experience any trouble with the audio or visual portions of today's presentation, I'll ask that you contact Adobe Connect directly. If you want to jot down their phone number, they are at 1-800-422-3623. That's 1-800-422-3623 for Adobe Connect. Today's presentation is being recorded and will soon be made available for on-demand viewing on the BU Alumni Association website, found at bu.edu/alumni. Our speaker today is very eager to answer any questions you may have, and you're welcome to submit them throughout the presentation using the Q&A chat box you should see at the bottom of your screen. We hope to get to as many questions as we can during today's webinar. It's now my pleasure to introduce our speaker for the day. Presenting from Santa Cruz, California is College of Arts and Sciences alumna Dr. Jill Steinberg. Jill is an emeritus professor at San Jose State University, a licensed clinical psychologist, Salzburg Fellow, author, and founder of MyRetirementWorks.com. She received her undergraduate degree from BU in 1972 and a doctorate in clinical psychology from Ohio State University in 1978. She teaches classes and has presented her research on successful retirement to universities and other impressive organizations, including Mensa, Google, and more. Jill is a dedicated lifelong learner, having a Ph.D. in clinical psychology with an emphasis on community organizing. In her pre-retirement life, she was a director of the Peer Mentor Program and a psychology professor at San Jose State, as well as a licensed clinical psychologist in private practice in Santa Cruz. A few years into retirement, Jill realized that her psychologist brain was missing something. She wondered, how closely does the theoretical research literature on retirement match what real people are actually doing and feeling? And MyRetirementWorks.com was born. Jill, thank you so much for being available to do this. This is an updated presentation of a webinar you already did for us a couple years ago, so I'm excited to hear some of the updates you have to share. But again, I really appreciate you doing this for us. So we're going to get your slide deck up now. If you select that drop-down box next to Share My Screen and click on Share My Screen, then we can take a look and get your slide deck up so everybody can see it. And it might just take a second while it recognizes your computer, but we'll get running in just a second here.
So right now it says desktop, and behind it I have my slideshow. So
okay, it's just taking a second on my end to pull up what you're looking at. Actually, you might, if it asks you to select your desktop, then you want to click on that.
I'll click share.
Yep.
Okay. All right. Let me go here.
Perfect. I see that you're putting your slide deck into presentation mode.
Cool.
It looks perfect on my end. Take it away.
Okay. Well, thank you, Jeff and Boston University alumni, for your interest in my presentation. I have to say, we are so cool that we're from all over the world, and you didn't mention my best friends are here from Philadelphia. So, given the time constraints, I'm going to take questions at the end, and I actually shortened the presentation. The full version will be, with all the references, will be on my website. Successful retirement. What does that make you think? If you're like most people and the research literature, you're thinking about having enough money and looking forward to enjoying free time without much thought to what retirement will actually look like. Until recently, many thought of 65 as the age of retirement. And 65 was the age legislated by the Social Security Act of 1935 as a time when individuals could start collecting an old age benefit. In 1935, life expectancy was 61, and currently the average life expectancy is in the 80s. Life in retirement has the potential to be over 20 years. Although the bulk of the research deals with financial issues, and having enough material resources to retire is necessary to having a successful retirement, financial information is covered amply elsewhere, and so we're not going to cover it here. We're going to look at quality of life, what activities you're going to engage in that are necessary to create a retirement that meets the needs for pleasant associations, purpose, and living without regret. To address successful retirement, I did a review of the scholarly research literature and did focus groups and classes with 100 retirees. Although my particular sample is not random and is biased towards highly educated, above average income retirees, and perhaps represents a more ideal retirement, it definitely represents real people like us. To disseminate the information, I started my website, myretirementworks.com, and I'll be telling you more about it later. The presentation is based on the assumption that you have created or are creating the financial resources you need to retire. Having a successful retirement is likely the stated or unstated goal of virtually all retirees and working people. However, retirement's a privilege only some of us earn. It's a stage of life where we can arrive having earned and learned invaluable resources along the way. Goals change across the lifespan, and with age, although our memories might not be what they used to be, research supports that our emotional stability has improved, our knowledge has grown, and our expertise has deepened. In important ways, older people can contribute more than younger people. The research literature does find that for most retirees, life in retirement is better or the same as it was before. More specifically, the research finds that retirement can start with a honeymoon phase, then there's a steep decline that stabilizes to at least as happy as one's working time. It is more difficult, though, and there's an initial decline for people who retired earlier than expected or were forced to retire. Depending on the survey, up to 25% continue to experience difficulty adjusting, and this is true regardless of the age the person retires. It's your choice which way you want to go. You can be like the people I interviewed who were successful in their careers and are now dissatisfied in retirement because they came to this point having little or no idea what to do themselves. Or the people I interviewed who are successful at their careers and continue to be successful, like Arthur. Arthur, at least temporarily retired a year ago at age 47 after working at Google for almost 12 years. Among his many contributions, he helped develop text messaging, which is actually why he could retire. And listening to the many people who said, if you have the chance, be with your family, especially when your children are young, Arthur took that chance, as well as a chance to have time to do something else, totally his own way. He's home with his wife and 2-year-old daughter, is fully engaged in his computer science projects, and is not sure if he'd call himself retired. He knows that he's going to stay home until Eva enters kindergarten, and then he's not sure whether he'll go back to work or what he'll do. Cindy's in her 70s. She retired 12 years ago from her position as a university professor and administrator. She's actively involved in volunteer positions with children, and she's on the board of our UCSC's Lifelong Learners and runs the photography interest group. Cindy spends time traveling with her friends, as well as significant time with her daughter and granddaughter. She also loves having time to be at home with her husband and dog. Brian's in his mid-50s and retired 2 years ago from his career at Hewlett-Packard when he was offered an early retirement package. The thought of turning 55 and being able to do something different appealed to him. He's seen a lot of change over his 32 years working and wasn't having as much fun. Brian's doing all kinds of different things in retirement, such as taking art classes at the university, and he's involved in a mentoring relationship with an 11-year-old boy. He's originally from England, travels a lot, visits his grandchildren, and sometimes he works for his friends in their tech companies. Brian's wife says he's the poster child for retirement. Leslie has a little different situation. She's in her 60s. She retired 4 years ago from her director of mental health positions in California. In addition to retiring, she also had to deal with the sudden and unexpected deaths of her husband and her dog, and consequently living alone. Leslie says that her life has hit a rhythm that seems to make sense, at least for now. She has part-time work on a state project. She teaches meditation. She spends time with friends. She runs a couple of mentoring groups. She reads and hangs out in cafes. She says, I know this is a transition time, but she's not feeling pressured to finish or figuring things out in a rush. She says it's a process. I'm going to tell you more about Arthur, Cindy, Brian, and Leslie throughout the presentation, as well as others who are enjoying their retirement to illustrate the research. The goal for this presentation is to get you educated and involved in thinking about and planning for the stage or tweaking how your life is going. Point is, you're never too young to think about retirement, and you're never too old to make it better. So Jeff already told you about my background when I graduated from BU, and that I was a professor and other things. So let's see. I won't review all that, but here I am when I was 34, and my book, Climbing the Ladder of Success, Backgrounds of Professional Women, was first published. And shortly after that, I started publishing on the imposter phenomena, which is a concept. It's very in vogue right now. Many bright people say they experience it. Let's see. I'm 66, and I retired 9 years ago when I was 57. And what we thought about retirement when I was at BU in the 60s is not what retirement was like historically, and definitely not what it's like now. Working in retirement used to be an oxymoron, and now it's becoming the new normal. From the studies that address factors associated with quality of life in retirement, the primary findings associated with retirement adjustment and happiness include having a sense of control over the decision, really increases your likelihood of having satisfaction, having social networks, planning, goal-directedness, implementing some activities before one retires. And that I got from my subjects. That's not in the scholarly research, but you're going to see, and I'll keep illustrating it, it's doing things before retiring, and you'll see why that's important. Having a sense of purpose, in addition to material resources, increases the likelihood of successful retirement, including better health. Retirement can affect men and women differently. Retirement can create stress for the couple. And retirees who are single, who are going solo, have a unique set of issues. Having a sense of control over the decision to retire, being able to decide how and when to retire, can affect the person's ability to plan. It's correlated with higher levels of self-efficacy, mental well-being, and how well people take care of their health, as well as higher levels of income. Forced retirement, on the other hand, is a predictor of adjustment problems, including higher levels of depression. And it can have a negative effect on the retired worker and their spouse or partner. Just a word about finances. I said I wasn't going to deal with it, but here was something that came up in the literature and with my sample. In terms of sense of control, many responders supported the research finding that having a pension helped them make the decision and it helps them feel more in control of their lives and more secure and happy with being retired. So, what's retirement anyway? The literature tended to discuss retirement as a discrete point in time. For most, however, the boundary between work and retirement has become unclear. Retirement is evolving, and for the majority with your background, it's a process that takes the form of being self-employed or working for someone else, often for purpose or to give back rather than accumulate more wealth. According to employment statistics, the older workforce is growing more rapidly than the younger workforce, including an aging of the science and engineering labor force. 55 and over is the only age group where workforce participation rates have been rising, which is in contrast to past decades of decline. In the general population, 1 in 5 workers age 50 and older has a retirement job. And for those in science and engineering, 1 in 3 workers are over 50. Some of the literature supports the finding that transitioning into retirement with bridge employment is associated with better physical and mental health in comparison with full retirement. But overall, the literature is consistent in only one finding, and that is that what matters most is whether the person perceives the retirement decision as forced or chosen. Fortunately for us BU alumni, perceived control increases with education, wealth, and socioeconomic status. Advantaged individuals accumulate more opportunities for controlling transitions throughout life. Another consistent research finding is that retirement tends to be easier for people who are goal-oriented and therefore able to plan what they want to do once they've retired. Planning is correlated with higher retirement satisfaction and better adjustment. However, according to current Social Security data, future retirees do not plan for the decision very long. About half only took 6 months to a year. Arthur told me 2 stories that he said made him realize he had to carefully plan if he was going to retire. The first story involved his wife, who was in a book group with a woman who turned 103 years old, and she had retired when she was 50. That 103-year-old told her book group, "Before you retire, make sure you know what you're going to do." She said, "Don't just jump off a cliff, so to speak, and try to figure it out after you've left. It doesn't mean that what you're going to do is what you plan to do, but have a plan, or it can be very disorienting not to have one." Arthur took her advice and started thinking about retirement many years before he retired. The second story involved a friend of Arthur's who had started 5 different startups. One did well, and he was also able to retire quite early. The friend came to Google to give a presentation. In the middle of his talk, he went off topic. He was starting to think, and he started talking about retirement. He said, "You know all those projects you want to get work on, and you think work's getting in the way? You're likely to find that if you stop working, you won't get to them anyway. It's really you." Well, Arthur thought that cynical, but he knew there was some truth in the warning, and he put the conditions in place to work on his own projects before he retired. Now, many of you are like Arthur. You're remarkably bright, you're self-directed, focused, and self-driven, and you're going to make excellent decisions and plans. The research supports that people like Arthur will use the same approach of dealing with the problem situation in retirement they used with other problems to be solved in their careers. However, the literature on behavioral economics finds that people are not good at accurately predicting their future happiness and behavior, which leads to suboptimal retirement decisions. I'm going to give you a few of the pitfalls to watch out for. Individuals experience loss aversion, and put simply, that just means losses hurt more than gains feel good. Applying this to retirement, individuals' potential to earn more may not be enough to compensate for the reluctance to work longer. Additionally, individuals experience impact bias, which is the tendency to overestimate the intensity and duration of their emotions in reaction to positive and negative future events. Individuals may choose to retire early because they think working longer will be worse than it is, and life in retirement will be better than it is. Individuals can pre-experience future events through mental simulations. However, individuals' perceptions are often inaccurate, and they can lead to a mismatch between mental simulations and actual experience. Here's why. Researchers Gilbert and Wilson argue that mental simulations are unrepresentative. They're from memories of past events, and individuals will remember most clearly the best and worst aspects of an event, as well as the final moments. Mental simulations are essentialized. They contain the main features of an event, not minor details. When thinking about retirement, people tend to imagine and focus on the larger issue of leisure time without the smaller details of how to spend the time, or whether friends are going to be retired, whether they'll know what to do later on in the retirement. Mental simulations are abbreviated and decontextualized. All that means is that the mental simulations are shorter than the actual event and are in a different context. People imagine the beginning of retirement when it can feel like a long weekend, and not later when there might be the potential of boredom or lack of purpose or loneliness. And lastly, this is kind of a mouthful. People tend to be hyperbolic discounters. And all that means is we put too much weight on the benefit of rewards that we can receive immediately. So here's how it goes. When people get promise of a large reward far in the future, that gets chosen over a small reward in the present. However, as that large reward gets closer to the present, individuals' preferences tend to reverse, and we become more impulsive, and we prefer the sooner, smaller reward. Indeed, 41% of people retire earlier than expected. People expect to retire at age 65, but the median age is actually 62. 72% of people plan to work after age 65, and only 27% do. The main point from all this to take away is to start planning for retirement when it's far in the future, and you can focus on critical issues with more data, more rational and clear thinking. In addition to being goal-oriented and able to plan, some other consistent predictors of well-being include flexibility in goal adjustment and tenacity in goal pursuit, as well as the ability to deal with failure and loss. So here's Elliot Aronson. Some of you may have heard of him or know of him. He's one of the most eminent social psychologists, and he's known for his work in cognitive dissonance. He talked to me about what it was like when he learned he was going blind. He trained to walk with a white cane, he trained to live with and work with a service dog, and he made his computer able to read text to him. And he moved to downtown Santa Cruz with his wife so that he could walk everywhere. Elliot's able to continue doing his research as well as stay in touch with his colleagues. And after many years of giving up teaching because he could no longer see his students, at age 81, Elliot recently co-taught a social influence course with me, and we used the same text, which was his, and that I read in my social psych class at BU only 16 editions later. Other responders reflected the literature that pre-retirees may underestimate the challenges of retirement and wish they had planned more. They expressed that even with goal setting, graduation to this new stage in life came too early, too quickly, and has really been a difficult transition. Having social networks, staying connected, including social connectedness as well as internet connectedness, are vital at any time in life and definitely in retirement. Here's another big one, a big theory title. Socio-emotional selectivity theory posits that older adults shift priorities to stronger, emotionally rewarding ties versus cultivating new relationships. Also, our perspectives and sense of time changes to how much time we have left. So here's a photo of 5 of us BU alumni. We met our first year at BU and still enjoy getting together even though we live all around the country. And as I said, we took some classes together at BU, and Bonnie and Sharon are in class with me now attending this webinar. Spending time with other adults enhances other adults' capabilities, life satisfactions, general well-being, health, and sense of mattering. Perceptions of positive social relationships are associated with greater involvement in leisure activities, and greater involvement in leisure activities is correlated with better health in old age. There's a new term called innovators. Those with more education have more leisure and enjoy it more, and those who are innovators who start new activities have an even higher rate of satisfaction. This is a time in life when people life can experience many losses. The retiree's world can shrink like Dr. Aronson's, from ending work, declining health, death of loved ones, including pets, and moves. And additionally, Brian, Arthur, and others, like Devon, who Devon's only in his 30s, and all of them left tech, they talked about an issue called tech bubble. And unlike academia, which encourages emeritus professors like myself to come back and work with colleagues, tech tends to protect its secrets and exclude workers who leave from information and getting together. You know, I told you about Arthur. Well, when I went to give my presentation to Google, even though he started text messaging, he wasn't really allowed to come to my presentation. I had to talk to the people that had invited me to let him come back. That's how closed it is once you leave tech. Communication online can also help. Older people using the internet experience a 20% reduction in depression, and older people tend to use the internet to disseminate information, meet people, and strengthen ties. Therefore, having and being open to others and staying connected to others in person when possible, or by email or video chats, or like we're doing in this webinar, are especially important, especially at this stage. Oh, interesting. Social robotics is a whole new growing field, including robotic pets. The role of mattering and having a sense of purpose are often overlooked, can be quite challenging, and if dealt with well, affect well-being in retirement. The research on purpose in life finds that lack of purpose contributes at least as much to disease and death as do lifestyle factors such as tobacco use or poor diet, inactivity, and stress. And with strong purpose in life, individuals do better psychologically, socially, sleeping, sexually. They're less likely to become depressed and more relaxed. Elizabeth Blackburn, the 2009 Nobel Prize winner in medicine, discovered the role of telomeres, you know, the ends of the chromosomes, including their relationship to aging and health. She and her colleagues found that having a purpose in life was associated with telomere length and therefore better health and less risk of dying. You know, in the classes I teach, that's really a big issue. So I've focused whole new sections on how to find purpose, especially at this age. In some aspects, retirement affects men and women differently. Oops. For women, there's a negative effect of a lifetime of household and caretaking on planning for retirement, earnings, and retirement income. Consequently, economic insecurity in old age is particularly acute among single, divorced, and widow women, even though women tend to retire later than men. For many women, retirement isn't as satisfactory as it is for their male partners because retirement does not relieve the burdens of family life, as women continue to do most of the household work, whether it's for their partner or their elderly parents or their adult children, their grandchildren. And if you look at the research, it actually even increases as we get older, the amount of caretaking and work that women do. Work may have been women's only source of, not only, but a main source of emotional support and limited the amount of time available to spend dealing with family responsibilities and conflicts. Some research even finds that women enjoyed being grandmothers more when they worked. Caring for a spouse has significant impact on the time of retiring. A woman with an ill husband is 5 times more likely to retire. A man with a sick wife is 50% slower to retire. For men, leaving a job that was very satisfactory is associated with more difficult retirement adjustments than for women. And after retirement, men are generally not as good as women at substituting the social involvements they had when they were working. As you see, these are the same gender issues that we've had all through life, how they're being expressed in retirement. Consequently, once retired, women tend to do more housework, volunteer more than men, and spend more time with others, while men are more likely to have bridge employment and leisure activities. In terms of couples issues, Google's past CFO, Patrick Pichette, expressed it best when he was leaving. He said, "Tamara and I will be celebrating our 25th anniversary. And when our kids are asked by their friends about the success of the longevity of our marriage, they simply joke that Tamara and I have spent so little time together that it's really too early to tell if our marriage will in fact succeed." He's right. The transition to retirement can be difficult for couples, especially the early transition period is associated with conflict and declines in marital quality. Although married retirees usually have better psychological well-being than single or widow retirees, this benefit actually disappears if one of the spouses is still working, with the most dissatisfied couple situation being when the wife is still working and the husband is retired. After the adjustment period, being married and retired with some leisure activities correlates with happiness. And interesting, although 3/4 of partners expect to engage in more activities together, less than half do. Having both people at home all the time has created problems for some couples. Many people, especially women, expressed what the research found, how much space has been an issue, and how they continue to encourage their husbands to get involved with something meaningful outside of the house. These women felt like their home environment changed in a way that curtailed some of their freedoms. So here's a funny example. When I was first announcing my research project to recruit subjects, a woman came up to me and started talking about her sister-in-law, and yeah, it really was about her sister-in-law. And she's telling me our sister-in-law is having problems with her husband because now that he retired, there was this expectation that she would spend more time with him, including having lunch together, and that she'd prepare lunch. Well, the funny thing, she walks away and a man comes up to me, a man I knew who was a retired engineer, and he says to me, "Jill, my wife's an artist. She works in her home and never be able to retire. I think one of the reasons my wife and I are dealing so well with both of us being home is I like to go out to lunch by myself." He said, "We got married for better or worse, but not for lunch." In contrast, living alone is a growing phenomena. Currently, 28% of all U.S. households are made up of people living alone, and that's more common than the nuclear family. A greater proportion of individuals reaching retirement age are unmarried. 1 in 3 baby boomers is unmarried and lives alone. Even though being unmarried makes one more vulnerable to social isolation, loneliness, health problems, and being economically disadvantaged, those living alone are healthier than those living with adults other than a spouse, or even in some cases, those living with a spouse. In recent decades, older people have demonstrated a clear preference for living alone rather than moving in with family or friends. They say they want intimacy at a distance. Today, only 20% of elderly widows live with a child, and in the past, it was up to 70%. In terms of coupling, one woman expressed the research when she said she's more interested in having someone to go out with than someone to come home to. This is another section. I started really an advanced course on retirement, and besides the sense of purpose, we're dealing with going solo or thinking about it and preparing for it now before you're actually there, or for many of the people, they are there. People who live alone actually become more socially active and involved in their community. Donna, Leslie, and Bill expressed it best. Donna said, I wasn't planning or wanting to go solo. I didn't choose it or embrace it, but I did accept it and grow into it. Since I've always lived with people, I found, once I got comfortable, a real sense of peace and gratitude. To have this space and place called home, to make all choices my choices with the most basic of things, what and when I want to eat, how to arrange flowers, do I turn up or down the music. These were the good, welcomed, and even kind of fun areas of personal freedom, never previously experienced. And maybe since towards the end of my marriage, which had an ongoing coolness and tension, it felt good to be solo. It was cleaner. The less attractive side, every decision is mine and not shared with a different perspective or support. Sometimes that feels a bit burdensome. She then ended by saying, I do hope to be back in an intimate relationship. Till that time, I have some romance, kind of like a seasoning. Maybe it's like curry, here and there, now and then, and it's always been nice and something to appreciate. Leslie said, after her husband's death, I'd let friends become a stronger part of my life, sharing in my vulnerable moments and my rough edges in ways I previously saved for my life partner. Bill, who's a retired physician, said that since his wife died 3 years ago, he experienced much loneliness. We're going to shift now from theory to reality with the hopes that you can either tweak your life or plan a better, most successful retirement. Most retirees, especially the women, wish they had planned ahead more. On the other hand, those like Cindy who felt they did successfully plan, Cindy took 10 years and recommended at least that long. She changed her position at the university to have less responsibility and more time. She started taking classes at the university and started volunteer work so that she would have something meaningful with some structure to do as soon as she retired. Brian said while he was working very long, focused hours, he didn't have much time to think about things not tech related, to step back and expand his mind. He was one of the first of his group to retire, and he knew that he wouldn't have friends around to do things, so he would have to intentionally do things to make friends. He knew that without work, he could get to some of the projects he'd neglected, but he'd also need some structure and meaning. So he got involved in his art classes and mentoring also before he left his job. He wanted to ensure that he'd have something on his calendar to help him avoid the dip of a totally blank week. Arthur thought about retiring for years and started planning it 2 years before he retired. He worked on and wrote down 3 things: what projects he wanted to work on, what goals he had, and what he wanted a typical day to look like. He also knew that making it concrete would be helpful. Arthur said that creating a routine helps. He doesn't always follow his routine, but he's guided by it. And his biggest fear of leaving Google was that he'd lose companionship, especially be isolated from other tech people, especially people who like talking tech. Anyway, he figured this out and he worked really hard to maintain his friendships, and he created a new tech bubble for himself. For those who don't plan ahead, their efforts can be hit or miss. Working on how to spend the day can be an ongoing issue. The research says that people need strategies like Arthur, Cindy, Brian, and Leslie implemented to support achieving goals, as well as strategies to cope with the failure of not achieving goals. Taking the time to think and the skills to reflect are significant and necessary. Most responders emphasize the importance of being open to people and opportunities. Many said, just say yes. Finding satisfaction may require being especially open to short-term opportunities, like taking a class or a time-limited job or one-term volunteer experience, to check out the organization and the people to see if it's something you want to do more with them. Leslie had a different approach. She recommended taking on retirement as a project. Observe and learn from other retired people. Research retirement by asking people you know who are retired what works for them and what hasn't worked for them. At least visit my website, she said, and read her stories and others and keep up with the research. And Leslie, who's had, as I told you, a lot of losses, she's figured out a way to pretty much enjoy her life. And she recommends figuring out what elements you want in your life in a day. Leslie plans her day by including the following elements: physical activity, social connection, meditation, creativity, and for her, creativity could be writing or cooking or going to a music event, and service to others. So this is trippy. Leslie uses her mental health and meditation backgrounds to teach meditation to diverse populations. So she teaches it to prisoners, to elderly living in assisted living, and lawyers. Leslie, along with most of the responders, supported the research finding that exercise is important. And those who weren't satisfied, again, they didn't have the self-awareness skills necessary to figure out what they wanted to do to give themselves a sense of purpose with all this time. Others made their lives too busy. For example, by joining too many boards and taking care of others too much. They had to figure out what was important and how to limit their commitments. One woman said, "I flunked retirement. Without fallow time, I worked too much, then I retired too much. I'm sorry I didn't take the time to figure out my new identity." Many responders suggested taking on one main interest, giving it enough time to try it out instead of assuming too many obligations at once. The interest can be from one's past, like one's career, like Eliot's in psychology, or Arthur's in computer science, or it can be from outside one's work, like Eric. Eric earned his degree in art and architecture at MIT, and he ended up spending his career working in early childhood education, a little different than his plans. Upon retiring, he's using both of his interests, designing and making wooden toys for all ages, and he's writing and publishing children's books. Paula and Jim Ferris, both in their 90s, met at MGM in Hollywood working on Tom and Jerry cartoons. And after retiring from a career as a film editor, Jim, along with 4 others, started our UCSC's Lifelong Learners 30 years ago when he and Paula first retired and they moved to Santa Cruz. Additionally, Jim and Paula started and kept up with a film group they ran in their home for over 25 years. And they kept it up until 1 week before Jim died this past year. Maurice and Rachel Enzer are French, and they live in Paris. At 91, Maurice is writing his 10th book, and he only started writing once he retired from his work as an engineer. And Rachel, retired after a 40-year career as a psychologist, is now an art student in the Louvre. One retired pilot told me that his childhood passion was cycling, and with his new wife, they're traveling and cycling around the world. The literature says volunteering can be especially beneficial at this stage. It's cited as one of the things that makes people happy and improves quality of life. What it doesn't say, though, is finding volunteer work that's fulfilling isn't always easy. There may be a lot of volunteer experiences, but not necessarily at the level of responsibility the person's used to. And the literature finds that when volunteering, women tend to assume the role of helping and men assume administrative roles. And people like us with more social capital are the ones most likely to be volunteering. And responders like Cindy, whose passion is with children, said that her most successful way for finding a good volunteer opportunity was by networking. The literature and managers say that they find mentoring deeply satisfying with more long-term ongoing relationships. And further, the research says that retirees who get involved for generative reasons, working with teaching and sharing knowledge with the younger generation, experience improved psychological well-being. Dusty's finding much joy with her husband, Craig, traveling on their own and leading groups for trips for UCSC's lifelong learners. This is a need, this group travel, for many retirees who now have the resources and desire and time to finally travel, but have no one to travel with. Others say they figured out how to enjoy retirement, but are now realizing that they're missing something and are having to once again determine what they want to do that's meaningful and fulfilling. One nurse, who was a female nurse, and a male retired CEO both expressed how the first long weekend was great, But now what? They and others illustrate Horner's research that retirement can start with a great honeymoon phase, then there's a steep decline, then it can stabilize. And lastly, most participants made a point of saying how much they liked and valued Santa Cruz as a great place for retirement. And the research also says that one's environment is important for a successful retirement. They cited that Santa Cruz is beautiful, it has fine transportation, safe places to walk, cafes, and opportunities to get involved in the community as well as give back. And others also love the ocean and the chance to do things like kayaking, as I'm doing here with my dog Herbie, whom I was finally able to get once I retired. And most of the retirees said they value the lifelong learners at UCSC for social connections, as well as the chance to be in a world-class university, which makes it easier to be lifelong learners. I'm about to conclude. So if you want to learn more, I will be updating my research page of my retirement works. You can read stories, and I'm hoping that you will consider writing your own for the website. In conclusion, although this sample of highly educated, above average income retirees is not representative of all retirees and perhaps represents a more ideal retirement, the responders are role models of regular people successfully enjoying retirement and illustrate some significant learning points raised in the research literature. And by the way, I made the point of saying regular people because if you get AARP, they always have celebrities and these gorgeous people on that cover that, most of them have lives that we would never have. So my research is about people that really have had lives like we are having. Retirees are largely satisfied with their lives, and for some, this may be the happiest they've ever been. Having a sense of control, being goal-directed, planning for retirement, implementing some projects before retiring, having concrete strategies to deal with goals and losses, and having supportive social and tech connections are all factors associated with having a purposeful, meaningful, and successful retirement, including better health and being better prepared for going solo. Retirement, like other developmental stages, takes adequate financial resources, planning, and reflection, and is an ongoing process of multiple and cumulative transitions. The Beatles said it best: I get by with a little help from my friends. Thank you, and here's to your successful retirement. Besides today, I hope to hear from you either through my website or there's my email. That would be great. Okay, so now I'm open to questions, Jeff.
Jill, thank you so much for doing this presentation for us. I do want to put in an extra plug for your website, myretirementworks.com. I myself have spent some time reading some of the stories, and they're very inspiring and helpful. And so I want to encourage everybody to visit you there or follow up with you by Gmail. While we're waiting for some questions to come in, and again, feel free to use that Q&A chat box at the bottom of the screen. You can just type in your question. Try to keep it short to a sentence or two. We do have a few minutes left for people to ask questions of Jill. And Jill, I have a question for you. As you know, I've known you for a few years now, and know the breadth and depth of the literature review that you've done, the detailed interviews you've done with some of your subjects. And I guess I'm just curious to know, I'm turning 42 this year. If you had the opportunity to go back and tell yourself, at 42 years old, what you know now about retirement, would you do anything differently? What is the advice that you would pass on to your 40-year-old self?
Yeah, actually, I didn't I planned financially, and that was great because I grew up poor, and BU helped me get through with work study and all those things. So financially, I learned on my own to plan, but I really didn't plan about how I was going to use the time. And if you look at my retirement, I'm not sure if you would say I was forced or I chose to leave. Technically, I totally chose to leave. But like many of the people I've interviewed, I got sick of having not great bosses. My work was awesome. I really didn't want to leave my work. So it was a very difficult decision. I had this, prize thing. I started a new program at the end of my career that was probably the most successful student program. I got to take students then to Europe. It really, my job part was awesome, but having difficult administrators made it just, I was old enough that I wanted something different. So I left, and I really hadn't planned how to do my beginning years. Now, fortunately, I was a person that had a university calendar, so I always knew summer's coming, what are you going to do? I had it in me to do a lot of the things the research said to do, like to implement things beforehand. But I wasn't as as how I am so focused and clear thinking. I wasn't that way. So the first couple of years, I kind of fumbled about what should I do. So I was taking classes. I thought I might like to learn music. I took some classes. I thought, well, music and psych would work. I tried that. I went to conferences. People wanted me to get involved in Canada with the research. But it just wasn't right until finally, through a series of events and books I read, I realized, you know what? I am really a psychologist, and I've got to start doing something very focused around my career. And as I brought up, the reason I brought up about my book about women making it professionally is really my whole career was helping people. How do you live life the most successfully you can? So that's when I decided, okay, I'm going to start interviewing people who actually are retirement. And then things fell into place for me. I had a sense of purpose, of focus, and not working, I had time to do other things. Like I said, I waited 30 years to get Herbie, my dog. So I finally had a dog. I have time to do other things, and I have time to do my work, but it doesn't consume my whole life. So really, if I would do it over, I would be thinking, how do I want to spend my time? What are some of the things I could implement now, or that I haven't had a chance to do? Because too many people that come to my classes now, they've lost a partner, or they've lost some health, or they've lost some motivation, or something has happened that they're not doing. Either they hadn't thought about what to do, or they are not quite as able. So we're having to help them kind of recharge. So that was a long answer, but I hope that's helpful.
Oh, makes sense. Yep. Yeah, absolutely. A couple people chiming in with just comments. Mary typed in to let us know that she and her partner are starting a nonprofit in retirement at the age of 63. Congratulations, Mary. Best of luck with that.
Cool.
VB is asked if the recording of this session will be made available. Yes, we've recorded this session, and it will be available on YouTube and also on the Alumni Association website. It'll be up in about a week, but definitely look for it there. And then Helen has asked an interesting question that you sort of touched on, Jill. Helen, I'm gonna sort of rephrase your question. So she has been single for a
Mm-hmm.
while and now has a boyfriend. They both have just recently finished caring for elderly parents and are planning to be married at
Mm-hmm.
61. So congratulations, Helen. Um, and her question is sort of, they've been independent people for a long time, and then in retirement are going to now be in a committed couple. And so, Jill, could you sort of rephrase what you talked about in terms of giving advice to these folks in terms of changing their lives in that way during retirement?
Wow, that's a big, incredibly excellent question. And actually, I think that will be a new section in the next on my research. So first of all, thank you, Helen. Congratulations. And if you can, email me, because this will take a little bit more thought. One thing I'll just say back to gender issues, that women after age 65, if they're not employed, actually take on an hour more of caretaking. And they're not particularly happy about it necessarily. It's just how things evolve. They do more that way. And they don't get to have enough leisure, and particularly leisure that's physically active, that can help with health. So I would say, look at what you enjoy doing now by yourselves and see if there's any way you can schedule in. I still want to make sure I have time with my friends, if that's what's important to you, or time to do your art, or time to read. These are things I've been missing. Like Donna said, she's now missing romance, or she's missing getting the flowers for somebody else, or being able to go to this webinar and talk about it afterwards with someone. She was missing that with a partner. So what is it before you do these things? I'm saying plan ahead. What is it that I'd like to see? And I'd say think about a typical day or typical week. What is it that you still want to happen? Are there goals you want? Just as I recommended on retirement, think about as you recouple. If you were ever coupled before, what worked, what didn't work. So that's kind of my quick answer is just like other different stages, what is it that you're wanting? And I find in my classes, just as that big theory says, socio-emotional theory is we tend to go for our close relationships. Well, then what happens, it's a very coupled world. For the people that are individuals, they don't get invited over at dinner. People are busy and they're going with people they know. It's harder to make friends. So I would encourage you to keep up what you have as best as you can and enjoy the best of couplehood. So was that an okay answer, Jeff, you think?
Absolutely, absolutely. Got some great questions coming in here. I want to ask folks, try to keep them to a sentence or two. We are running up the hour, but we'll take these last two questions from Gabrielle and Helen, actually. So Gabrielle has a really interesting question that I'm going to restate a little bit. So thank you, Jill. Loved your presentation. I'm 52 years old and was recently laid off from a 20+ year career in medical and pharma sales. Has a severance package, but she's struggling to find structure in her day. Long story short, so she's sort of in a transition period between full-time work and retirement. Gabrielle's question essentially is, how do you know when it's time to just fully retire? And I realize that there might not be a right or wrong answer to that, but how would you help somebody decide when it's truly time for retirement?
Wow, thank you for these questions. And I'll tell you what I'm going to do. I have one more section with my class. This is my advanced class. They wanted to continue so much that I did a graduate class. And I'm going to ask them these questions. And then somehow, if you email me, whoever is interested, I'll email you back. But I feel like I would not encourage someone to retire until they've thought about these issues, like you're saying you're struggling with time of day. I would want them to be thinking of how do they want to spend their time? What can they do now before they retire so that they have things in front of them that help them deal with this blank schedule? I would help them look at the literature on how do you find a sense of purpose. So it doesn't mean you have to know your sense of purpose, but it's a process so that when you're stuck or when your life changes or you have to move or whatever, you can find something new to do with yourself that feels valuable. So I guess, there's the, do you have enough money? There's, are you so sick of your job that you think you can do something else? I would be asking those kinds of questions because if people are miserable and they can afford to do it, I want them to do it before they can't do it or they lose other opportunities. That I would work with them to get a couple of these things in place so that they can then enjoy the next stage. Because people tend to do, they think, oh, I'm sick of this. It's going to be so great when I have all that time. And then it's not. So probably that's what I would do. And I'd be assessing what other resources they have, whether it's friends or exercise, or that's how I'm thinking about it.
We'll take this last question from Helen, and then if anybody else has questions for Jill, again, please feel free to email her at the address you see on your screen. Helen's question, again, summarizing here, it sounds like Helen has been focused mostly on her work for most of her life and is now wondering, Jill, if you have any recommendations for tips that Helen might use to discover what some of her passions might be so that she can focus on those in
Okay,
her
so
retirement.
definitely email me and I'll tell you two books of recent that I thought were good. One is called Life on Purpose by Stryker, and he teaches at University of Michigan, and he's in public health. And what happened to him, his daughter died when she was 19. And it's an involved story before that, how she got sick at 2 and had a difficult life. But anyway, he was actually totally devastated when she was 19 and wasn't functioning that well when she died. And he had to figure out at some point, now what? You know, he had other children, he had a wife, he had a career. He wanted to go on. He felt like his daughter would want. And he put together the research of life on purpose. And I feel like it's not at all in the literature on aging or on retirement. That's why I've added it. So I would look at that book. And then maybe this other book, it's called Designing Your Life. And right now the name, I can't think of the author. It's in the other room, but they're at Stanford and they're actually design professors. And I tend to use this when I'm working with younger people, but they have a lot of ideas, which really I learned back when I was in graduate school. We used to call it career life planning, but he has other ways of thinking about your values, your attitudes, how to map out ideas that really are the same now that you could do with networking, with making connections. How do you find friends? And it's really the same kind of thing. If you want a couple, you want to change your life. You've been single, you want a couple. How do you do it? They're really the same kind of structure, just different content. So, if the top of my head, if I was just going to read, I'd start with Life on Purpose, his book, not the graphic memoir, although that's cool. The book gives you more tools and it's more current. And then Designing Your Life.
Jill, I feel really lucky that we have you as a volunteer to share this great information with our alumni who are planning and considering retirement. So on behalf of everybody, we also have a ton of people who've just typed into the Q&A box to thank you for this presentation today. And so on behalf of all of Boston University,
Thank
thank
you,
you so
Jeff,
much for
and
doing
thank
this
you to
for us.
all of you. I can't do this without you, and it's really important information. Take care.
Absolutely. I want to thank all of our guests as well. I specifically want to thank those of you who've donated to BU in the past. We wouldn't be able to put on programs like this without your support. We have an incredible lineup of events coming up during the rest of the month of March. As I mentioned, a few of them still have space left. On Monday, March 27th, we have a wonderful presentation coming up online by an alumna fashion entrepreneur who's presenting a session entitled How to Dress for the Job That You Want. That's going to take place on March 27th. You can sign up for that now or other events on our website at bu.edu/alumni/career weeks. And as always, if you or any BU alum you know would be interested in presenting a webinar like this for the BU alumni community, please contact me at the Alumni Relations Office or by email at jtmurphy@bu.edu. Thank you everybody for your time. Have a great day or a great evening wherever you might be.